They just grilled a federal judge nominee on the Constitution, and he dodged every single question that mattered. From the emoluments clause to election integrity, he refused to say where he stands. If you think that's harmless, think again, because this is exactly how our rights get chipped away, one non-answer at a time.
President, I believe you're Senator.
And I take it as an originalist, you would accept that the founders would have never subscribed to the idea that a president in their time could have accepted a multi-$100 million gift from a foreign state.
Senator, the premise of your question implicates live issues in the public and pursuant to the canons of judicial ethics.
Well, let me just ask you, would the founders have believed that if a president received 100 camels from a foreign state, that that was an emolument?
Senator, it's difficult to answer that question in the
Is it, though, as
abstract.
an originalist? Isn't it pretty simple? You've got the clear language of the Constitution.
Senator, one has to look at the language, but also the history surrounding the emoluments clause in order to discern the
I am looking at the history. Let me move on to another question. As an originalist, do you believe that the Obergefell versus Hodges decision affirming constitutional right to same-sex marriage, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, Obergefell versus Hodges is binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
I'm aware of that. Do you believe it was wrongly decided?
Senator, as a circuit judge, I would be bound to follow
I understand that, but that's not responsive to my question. Had you been on the Court of Appeals prior to that decision, would you have decided the case that way?
Senator, prior to Obergefell versus Hodges, there was a prior Supreme Court case addressing the issue, and I would have followed that case.
Well, would you have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell?
Senator, I would have followed binding precedent.
You're not answering my question. Would you have reached the same conclusion?
Senator, the conclusions that the two precedents reached were potentially in conflict, and I would have to follow the precedent that...
So you can't tell us at this point whether you would have reached the same conclusion as the Supreme Court in Obergefell. So let me ask you about the Supreme Court's decision in Lawrence affirming a constitutional right to be intimate among same-sex couples. Do you believe that was wrongly decided?
Senator, Lawrence versus Texas is a binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
Again, I'm aware of that, but I'm asking you whether you believe that was rightly decided or wrongly decided.
Senator, you're asking about my personal views.
No, I'm asking you about your legal views. I'm asking about your legal views. Let me ask you about another case. Do you believe that Loving versus Virginia, which affirmed an interracial couple's right to marry, was that wrongly decided?
Senator, my wife and I are an interracial couple, and so if that case were wrongly decided, I would be in big trouble.
Okay, so you do agree with the reasoning of that case, and you're willing to say that. I appreciate that. But you're unwilling to say that you agree that Obergefell and Lawrence were correctly decided. Why is that?
Senator, again, those decisions are binding precedent of the Supreme Court, and I would be bound to follow.
No, I'm aware of that. So is Loving. And you're willing to tell us that you believe Loving was correctly decided, but you're not willing to say the other decisions were correctly decided. That seems less originalist and more situational. Let me ask you this about your role in the brief in Moore versus Harper. This was a case involving the discredited independent state legislature theory, which would allow a state legislature, even in the absence of a governor's signature, to effectively overturn an election. Do you believe that the Supreme Court wrongly decided Moore v. Harper when it rejected your view?
Senator, again, Moore v. Harper is binding precedent of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, no, I get that, but you're still not answering my question. So let me ask you a different way. If a state legislature decided after an election to pass a bill, even in the absence of a governor signing it, to throw out absentee ballots that were mailed prior to the election but arrived after the election, would it be your view that a state Supreme Court or federal court would have to allow the legislature to overturn the election, would be powerless to correct that effort to overturn a free and fair election?
Senator, Moore versus Harper states that state courts can review what the state legislatures have passed as a matter of the Constitution.
No, I'm aware of that. And my concern, though, is that your unwillingness to embrace the reasoning of these decisions means that where there is room, and there is room in all of these decisions, and most particularly Moore v. Harper, for you as a Court of Appeals judge to narrow these decisions, it sounds like you'll take that opportunity to.
Welcome back to Jace Manhwa. If you care about truth, accountability, and preserving the principles this nation was founded on, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Let's get into this. So, I just watched a Senate hearing that honestly shows why so many Americans have lost faith in our judicial system. We had Mr. Tong, a judicial nominee, being grilled on some of the most important constitutional issues of our time, and what we got was a masterclass in dodging direct answers. First, they brought up the Emoluments Clause. Now, this is straightforward. Our founders put it in the Constitution to make sure no public official could be influenced by gifts from foreign governments. The language says, any present of any kind, whatever, and to me, that's clear. If you're an originalist and a textualist, you stick to the plain meaning. But instead of saying yes, that's exactly what it means, Mr. Tong dances around with talk about context and history. We don't need more politicians in robes. We need judges who will follow the Constitution as written. Then came the big one. Questions on landmark cases like Obergefell versus Hodges and Lawrence versus Texas. The senator was trying to pin him down. Was Obergefell rightly decided or not? And what about Lawrence? Once again, nothing but binding precedent talk. Here's the problem: binding precedent can still be overturned. The real question is, will you defend the Constitution's original meaning, or will you bend to modern reinterpretations pushed by activist courts? His unwillingness to answer tells me everything I need to know. When Loving versus Virginia came up, the case that struck down laws against interracial marriage, he had no problem saying it was rightly decided. And of course, as a man in an interracial marriage himself, he'd look ridiculous saying otherwise. But this selective willingness to affirm certain rulings while sidestepping others? That's politics, not principle. An originalist's consistency should apply across the board. Then they tackled Moore versus Harper and the so-called independent state legislature theory. The senator painted it as some dangerous plot to overthrow democracy, but let's be real here. This is about the authority of state legislatures under the Constitution. If they're following their own state laws and procedures, that's not destroying democracy, that's federalism. But again, Mr. Tong refused to take a position, hiding behind precedent talk. Here's the bottom line. We need judges who will tell the American people exactly where they stand, not sidestep tough questions to keep everyone guessing. A judge's job is to interpret the law as written, not as they wish it to be. The founders didn't write the Constitution in vague poetry. It's plain English, and it's our duty to protect it. If we keep appointing people who won't commit to core principles, we're going to watch our rights erode piece by piece. This hearing wasn't just about one nominee. It's about the direction of our courts and whether we still value the original intent of our founding document. Stay informed, stay vocal, and never forget that this country is worth defending. Again, if you haven't already, hit that like button, subscribe to Jace Manhwa, and share this video so more Americans can see what's really happening in these hearings.